Hello, everyone from around the world. It's Anna Olson here, and I can wish you a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, even good night if you're watching from Australia or Southeast Asia. I'm so thrilled you could be here for the second installment of Oh Yum 101, and you voted for sponge cake. Now, this is a great recipe to pick. I'm so glad you did because there are lots of great tips I can share with you as I move through the recipe. I did provide the ingredients, so perhaps some of you are baking along with me, in which case we will get the cake made and into the oven, and then the finishing part you can take care of later, and I'll give you lots of ideas that way. Before I get started, I'd love to take a few minutes to say hello to people. First, hi, Mom, Dad, Michino. Suzanne, T, if you're watching, Kathy, if you're watching, Chef Patrick, Junior Chef Patrick, lots of people I know are watching. And I've been following the questions that you've been providing before we got started here. Lots of good sponge cake questions. I will try and handle a lot of them, work them into the conversation as I'm cooking, but also I'll take pauses here and there. Because this cake takes 40 minutes to bake, I'm not going to take 40 minutes of doing nothing just to answer questions. So I'll take a break here and there so I can take a few of your specific questions because you have been asking wonderful ones. So a sponge cake is all about the eggs. Ultimately, what counts is you're whipping eggs up with sugar. That gives the cake its airiness, its structure, and its volume to hold its shape and bake and be fluffy and light. And you can really tailor it to your taste and add little bits of flavor here and there. That's different than an angel food cake, which is made using only egg whites, a chiffon cake, which is made by separating your eggs. You whip your whites, you whip your yolks, and you put the two together, or what we would call a cream cake, where you cream your butter and sugar together and add your other ingredients. So lots of different styles, lots of different topics for Oh Yum 101, isn't there? And just to let you know, I do have a birthday coming up soon, and I might need your help on picking what kind of birthday cake I should make. But let's get to this sponge cake, which is based on the classic Genoa sponge. Now, I have my 6 large eggs right now, and they're sitting in a nice little warm water bath. Now, I don't know about you, but when you see a recipe call for eggs that are warm or at room temperature, I rarely have the forethought to pull out my eggs hours ahead of time. So, what I do is I take them directly from the fridge, put them in a bowl, and cover them with hot tap water. Now, for 6 eggs, that takes maybe a couple of changes of water and give it about 3, 4 minutes, and then you'll find it warms up your eggs. The reason you want to warm up your eggs when you're making a sponge cake is for a simple and technical reason. You'll get a fuller volume from a warm egg or room temperature egg than you will from one that's ice cold. So I'm going to crack these into my mixer. You will want to use either a mixer or electric beaters is absolutely fine. We're going for volume here. Now, I did catch a really good question from one of my viewers before we got started here. I think it was Elena from Moscow was asking, well, what if I have medium eggs? Now, eggs are graded by weight. And so regardless where you are around the world, you can accommodate any size of egg by weighing your eggs. So a standard large egg is 60 grams. The yolk is 30 grams, the white is 30 grams. So that really helps you, especially if you're doing other recipes and you've separated eggs. So all you have to do is crack your eggs into a bowl that's on a scale, weigh out, in this case, 6 eggs times 60 grams is 360 grams. Weigh out your 360 grams of eggs, and then you know you've got the right amount for this specific recipe. I'm going to hang on to this bowl because I'm actually going to use that. I've got 1 cup, the equivalent of 200 grams of sugar. And now I'm going to get this mixing on high speed. And this is where we've got time because you've probably heard about whipping egg whites and adding sugar and being cautious not to over whip it. When it comes to whipping whole eggs, you can't overdo it, honestly. And you're going to watch these transform as they're whipping. Right now, it's a golden yellow color. The warm eggs are now dissolving the sugar, and that is coaxing the structure and the volume into the sponge cake. Talking about substitutions here, you could use coconut palm sugar in place of granulated white sugar in this recipe, or you could use turbinado sugar. It will lend more of a beige color to the sponge cake. The reason I mentioned the coconut palm sugar is it registers half on the glycemic index. So if you're trying to watch out on your sugar consumption, it's a good substitution. You won't get the structure or volume using a sugar-free substitute. The sugar here really is an integral part of getting that structure and volume and fine bubble structure into your sponge cake. So you know what? I'm going to take a minute, take a look at I have my laptop set up so I can read your questions. Normally, I would have a whole big crew here and someone would be feeding me questions, but I have my producer, director of photography, taste tester extraordinaire, my husband Michael, here, because we're staying safe at home as we should. Can you see already, it's been 1 minute, how these egg whites have transformed? And if you're mixing these by hand, I hope you're using high speed. Even if you're using electric beaters, move the beaters around the bowl. But this isn't done yet. We can give this a good 8 minutes. So I'm going to take that time. Let me read a couple of questions because we did have some good ones. Hello, Venezuela, Minnesota, Saudi Arabia. I saw hello from Qatar. Hey, across the border, Buffalo. Hello, Buffalo. Mexico City. I see we've got lots of young people watching. You know what? I saw a couple of good questions based on oven temperature and convection versus non-convection, which is since we're baking a cake, temperature is an important topic. Typically, when you're baking the difference between a convection oven and a conventional oven is the movement of hot air. So a convection oven has a fan built in that circulates the air around the body of the oven. And that is excellent. It coaxes beautiful browning on things like potatoes and on chicken. And quite often, ovens will have a convection bake setting, which is a slightly lower fan because you don't want to over brown the outside of what you're baking too quickly before the inside has had a chance to set. Now, oven makes and models are different. I find newer models of convection oven factor in the fan and the temperature. So if a recipe says 350 or 325, you can assume that that's a conventional oven, and a newer model of convection oven will just automatically factor that difference. If you've got an older model, let's say 5 years older or more, you want to reduce your oven temperature with a convection oven by 25 degrees because that movement of the hot air actually accelerates the cooking of something. Now, another good question I've had along the way is a few of you mentioned before I started, you'll have a cake that rises up and sinks in the middle. And maybe it's a recipe you've been making for years. Now, I figured this out. I'm going to give my mom a shout out. I figured this out when my mom got a new oven when they renovated their kitchen. Now, this was quite some time ago, and I was in my early baking days. And I remember her saying that she was making a cake, a gingerbread cake that she used to make all the time. It would bake perfectly level. And then all of a sudden, with this new oven, it was sinking in the middle. So if you take an oven thermometer, I'm going to go grab mine from the oven right now. Just like so. Not a complicated tool at all. Pop that in your oven. Let me put it back. You may discover that your temperature is not what you're setting it at. So an oven, if you set it at 350, and if it's oscillating from 375, dropping to 325, and calling that average 350, that's okay if you're baking cookies, if you're baking muffins even, or if you're baking pastry, tart shells, puff pastry, what have you. But if you're making a cake and you've got that set of eggs and baking powder and flour and sugar all times in the oven, that up and down temperature can just cause a disaster in your cakes, and you'll find it'll raise up, but before your ingredients have had a chance to set, cool it down. So I think I'm answering quite a few people's questions with one answer. To fix your temperature, use an oven thermometer. Don't go always by what's on the oven or when it beeps and tells you it's ready, and watch that temperature. So if you're setting it to 350, but you notice the thermometer is saying 375, then you can run your oven a little lower. If it goes way out of whack, you can actually call a technician and get that adjusted. But wait until it's safe to go out again. So I have talked for about 5 minutes here. You see this beautiful volume? I'm going to shut off the mixer because it is super noisy and there's just no way around that. But I've got a nice thick mixture and it holds a number 8. We call that the ribbon when I paint that on top of the mixer. I'm going to do that for you a second, a little closer, because I want to give this a couple more minutes. So my bit of advice when you're making a sponge cake, if you think you've mixed your whole eggs and sugar well enough, mix it another minute more. You can't overdo it. So I'll take another moment to talk about getting your pan ready. Now, I do like, for this sponge cake recipe, I like using a springform pan. And it's not necessarily because of the latch. You can use a regular cake pan if you want, but what I like is the height of the pan. Conventional 9-inch pans, 23 centimeters, tend to be a little bit shorter. What you can do is put a piece of parchment around the inside to give your cake pan a little more height. Just keep in mind, if you line the inside edge of your cake pan with parchment, because of the nature of the fluffiness of sponge cake, you'll find you might get a little puckering on the outside of the cake. So what I do need to do, though, to get the cake off the bottom of my spring form is line the bottom with parchment paper. And I don't grease the sides of the pan. It's very, very important. When you're making a sponge cake, do not grease the pan. And that is because this beautiful sponge cake, this volume we're working into the eggs right now, as the cake rises in the oven, it needs to cling onto the sides of the pan to grow and bake level. If you were to grease the pan, you would have your cake raise up, but then it would slide down the sides of the pan and you risk getting a dome on the top of your cake. Okay, back to lining the pan. I've got my round here, and I've got a square of parchment. And I'd rather not use a marker and trace a circle. So back to geometry. If you watched OYUM 101 last week, we talked all about the Pearson square equation. Now we're dealing with basic circles with radius, but no math calculations involved here. So I've folded my parchment into quarters like a napkin. And as if I'm making a paper airplane, I'm going to fold it again and again. So the point is in the center. And now you just have to loosely measure. The point goes in the center of the pan, and I just hold with my finger where to cut. And now I've got my circle that will fit in the bottom of my springform pan. So I'm all set. And in that time, we've gone that extra minute on this beautiful, isn't it amazing? 6 eggs, 200 grams of sugar, and this is what you get. It's fantastic. Okay, oh yes, so I've got a prompter, the size of the pan. A 9-inch round or 23 centimeter springform pan or round cake pan. Now, this is the point where you can add a little bit of flavor if you want. Because I'm going to dress this cake with some fresh strawberries, I'd like to add a little bit of lemon. So I'm going to add a little lemon zest now. You can leave this out if you want a neutral or just vanilla cake. You could add orange, you could add lime. You could add other extracts like almond if you wanted to. And I am adding just a touch of lemon juice. Now, there's nothing technical about adding the lemon juice. It's more for just that little sparkle of flavor. You can leave it out completely. There's no substitution you need here. Give that a quick stir. You don't have to worry about the eggs deflating. There we go. Now it's time for the dry ingredients. Again, super simple measurements. So whether you've got this recipe in your head by weight or by volume, I love the even measurements. So by volume, you've got 6 eggs, 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of flour, 2 tablespoons of butter. That's all you have to remember. In metric weights, 6 whole eggs, 360 grams as we figured out, 200 grams of sugar, 150 grams of flour, and 30 grams of butter. Boom. Once you do this recipe once, twice, you won't even have to go back to look at the recipe. You're going to have it in your head. And that's that magical understanding the ratios and how ingredients relate together that you can tell I get a little excited about. Okay, so the flour. I've got 1 cup, 150 grams of all-purpose flour, and a quarter teaspoon of salt. The salt is there in baking for the same reason it's there in cooking. It's to balance flavors and season things. You can leave the salt out of the recipe. It's absolutely fine. I am sifting my flour. And I saw one of the questions pop up early on before I started, which was a great question. I'm just going to set this down. When is it really important to sift and when does it not really matter? In the case of a sponge cake, because we've spent all this energy working air and volume into it, and we want to integrate the flour very quickly, definitely sift. That way you won't get little lumps in your sponge cake. If I'm making chocolate chip cookies or banana bread, I'll admit I do, as a good habit, try and sift all the time because things like your baking powder, baking soda could have little lumps in them. You want to sift that through to work it in easily. But I will confess, I have been known not to sift my dry ingredients when making simple things like that. If you're in the kitchen with kids baking together, it's not going to ruin the recipe, but it is important with this sponge cake. Now, something I've learned over the years, when I first learned how to make sponge cake in cooking school, I was always told and taught to fold in the flour by hand. And I ran into the same problem where the flour would either sink to the bottom of the bowl or I would get these little pockets of floury lumps in my sponge cake. And that just didn't fly with me. What I figured out is you can do this by having your mixer on medium speed, and you can add the flour while the mixer is going. The key is to only do it quickly. So this is going to go very, very fast. Are you able to zoom in, Michael? DOP? All right. Okay. The activity is going to be right here. The nice thing is it's only a cup of flour, so it goes in quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as soon as you no longer see flour, stop the mixer. So in less time that it takes you to wash your hands with soap and water, you can add the flour to your timely comparisons to your sponge cake. Okay, so now it's time for the last step. Can you believe it? We're already at the end of making a brilliant genoise sponge. So let's take a look at this batter now. So you can see it's thick. There are no visible lumps from the flour. I've got that beautiful figure 8. I'm going to use this whisk again, so I'm not going to get rid of it. Now it's time to add the little bit of butter, 2 tablespoons of melted butter. I find it just lends a nice elasticity and a subtle butter flavor. It's not overwhelming. A sponge cake is about the eggs, and that's why I add it. Have I made a sponge cake and skipped the butter altogether? Yes. Someone did ask, can I use oil instead of the butter? I would rather you just eliminate it altogether than use the oil. I'm afraid the oil would be too heavy and weigh things down. So as I was chatting, I put about a cup and a half, 375 ml of the batter into the bowl. And I'm going to add to that my melted butter. It's still a little warm. It doesn't have to be completely cool to room temperature. It shouldn't be hot, hot. I'm going to add that and a splash of vanilla as my base flavor. Typically, sponge cakes are relatively neutral. You could replace half of the flour with cocoa powder. Then you definitely have to sift for a chocolate version. But I find a sponge cake is about the foil for other flavors, how you're going to fill it, top it, frost it, what have you. So what I've done is I've worked the butter into this base batter. So now I will have to do less stirring as I'm folding this into this because the butter is already worked in. If I were to add the butter to this big base, it would want to sink to the bottom and then it would just take longer to fold it in. Get every last bit of batter there. And for a step like this is why I didn't get rid of it. You can, if you're using hand beaters, you can just do this. Don't turn the beaters on. Just use this as a tool because the whip attachment or a whisk is pulling through the batter, not collapsing it. And that way you won't lose that fabulous volume. You just worked so hard to, to work into your 6 eggs and sugar. I'm going to move this out of the way for a second. Here's my pan. Oh, you know me. I'm a tidy as I go kind of girl. I don't like being stuck with a mess at the very end. And Michael's laughing because he knows. I do my dishes as I go along. I think that's the product of spending years as a pastry chef. When you have to do the early shift at 5 in the morning, no one else is in the kitchen. Guess who has to do the dishes? It's part of the job. All right, so straight into the pan. Just a reminder, this pan is not greased. I've got parchment at the bottom. If you don't have a springform pan or a 9-inch 23 centimeter pan, you could make this in an angel food cake pan if that's what you have. Now, I saw another great question come through. I'll be right back. And that is about when to tap your cake pan down before you put it in the oven, because you see some recipes refer to this, and it's a great question. A cream cake, a cake where you cream butter and sugar, add your eggs, flour alternating with liquid, you may sometimes in that process get larger air bubbles. And so you do want to tap the cake pan down to let those air bubbles rise up and pop. Well, we've just spent 10 minutes putting volume into our cake batter. So this is one where you definitely don't want to tap the pan. And also, when you put it in the oven, it takes about 40 minutes. And what you want to make sure you do is not open the oven for the first 30 minutes. That talking about cake sinking, if you create a vacuum and open your oven and all the hot air escapes, boo, that could cause your cake to collapse. So let this go for at least 30 minutes before you open the oven to take a peek. So I'll pop this in. Set my timer. There we go. Now, here's another interesting point. And now I'm going to do the magic of television thing here. Oh, look, I have one already done. I wanted to be able to show you this part of the recipe, not just making the cake. So I made one yesterday, let it cool overnight. And that actually brings up a great point. When you're making a sponge cake, the longer it has to sit, if it can sit for a full day before you slice it and assemble it, you'll find that it doesn't crumble as much, or it's easier to slice and work with than one freshly out of the oven and cooled. So getting to the point when it's time to check your cake out of the oven. So it's been about 40 minutes and you're looking at it and you've got this nice level top, even browning. To check the doneness of a sponge cake is different than a conventional cake or a banana bread. So instead of inserting a skewer in the center, which could give you a false reading because it might come out clean but yet not actually be fully cooked, you go for the spring. So you press the top of the cake just quickly and gently with your finger. When it springs back, then you know it's done. The eggs have fully set. And you'll find that as it cools, it may sink just a little bit in the center, but barely at all. So you can see that we've got a nice level cake here. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, Anna Olson, you didn't grease the sides of your pan. Now your cake's stuck to the pan. Well, it is. It's supposed to be. So this is what I was referring to with this sponge cake batter rising up. So it rose up a full 2.5 centimeters or an inch to the top of the pan, and it stayed in place. So once your cake has cooled completely, and I cool it completely in the pan, I leave it in the pan overnight if I'm going to make it a day ahead. And then I just use a straight palette knife or spatula. And I always like to start at the latch because that's where there's a little catch there, the seam. And I'm going to get it off the cooling rack. And I'm really pressing around the outside of the pan to release it. There. Right through to the bottom. All right. How are we looking there? And with the parchment at the bottom, it comes off the pan easily. We've got nicely brown sides, not a lot of crumb. And if you want to make your cakes ahead of time, this is a great point to wrap and freeze your sponge cakes. Sponge cakes freeze amazingly well. And then you just pull them out, let them thaw on the counter until they're done. You know what? Before I get going, I've got a few my filling ingredients here. I'll get them ready. Why don't we take a pause? And I think I've answered a lot of the earlier questions, but I'd like to see what you're asking now. How's everyone doing? Good? Staying up late if you're on the other side of the world. Nice midday break if you're here. I'm outside of Toronto, so the same time zone as New York City. Just having a nice midday break on a Thursday here. Oh, I see lots of hearts. Oh, you're sweet. Hello, everyone. Arnab, very, very sweet. Oh, a good question. Can a sponge cake be made without an oven? That's true. Steaming can be an option with sponge cakes. Um, I typically reduce the sugar when I'm making a sponge cake. So I have adapted, in fact, um, many of my recipes I have adapted, including a carrot cake, and I made a steamed pudding version of it. So if you're using a bamboo steamer or a wok steamer, you can steam it. The texture will be different. It'll have definitely more moisture, which is why I reduce the sugar because I find it comes out sticky. So reduce the sugar by, I would say, at least 30%, and you should be good there. That was a good question, an interesting one. Oh, help Miriam staying up late in New Zealand. Hello, hello. And the Philippines. Oh, and okay, we've got a question from Saskatchewan. Same way. Angel food cake. The question was sponge cake and angel food cake. Well, now I gave you the option to vote on angel food cake this week. So maybe I'll put that back on the list and we'll see if we can vote for it next week. And I can go into detail because while it involves whipping egg whites, the method and result is quite different when making an angel food cake. You need a different flour. You're looking at getting the volume and treating egg whites is different than treating whole eggs. So that's a good question. Yes, it does have its own method. I do have a recipe for angel food cake right here on Oh Yum. If you want to pull that up, I think that was Ted that wrote from Saskatchewan, which is also where my sweetie is from. Beautiful Foam Lake, Saskatchewan. How many people are watching from Foam Lake? uh, okay. Oh, a good question. If I reduce the sugar, would it change the physical aspect of the cake? Yes. The recipe calls for 200 grams. If you were to reduce it any further than, oh, I would not do less than, um, say, definitely not less than half, but even 25%. Unless you're steaming it, then you need to reduce the sugar. But if you're baking it in a dry heat oven, you would not get the structure. And I think you would find you get big air holes and the cake would collapse a little bit. So that's an excellent question to ask. Um, oh, we're going back to our croissants. Uh, if you joined me last week, I made croissant from start to finish right here on OEM 101. And the question was asking about refrigerating them more than 24 hours. I will be honest, I had a lot of croissant left after my class, so I had to leave them in the fridge, and I took my time rolling and shaping them, and I left them as long as 48 hours. The final batch I did, and I baked a few off on Sunday, and they came out absolutely fine. So yes, you can let it sit up to 24 hours. Between each rolling, until the final roll, try and shorten that time a little bit, but yes, you can. Great question. Oh, am I going to decorate the cake with flakes of coconut? Ooh, well, that sounds lovely, but I don't have coconut on hand right now. What I do have is fresh strawberries and a cream filling. So this is almost like a variation on a Victoria sponge, a classic British dessert that celebrates strawberries and cream together. What a great combination. So I've got my cake all set on a wheel. You could just set it on a cake plate. The decor work for this cake, I'm keeping relatively simple right now because you're welcome to do whatever you would like with your sponge cake. If you want to leave it open sided and do cream and fruit, it suits it. The lightness of the sponge cake suits it. If you want to do a more classic European style torte with a buttercream frosting or a more elaborate filling, a lemon curd would be delicious. I've got lots of recipes. You can just pull up on Oh Yum to switch out your filling. A lemon curd actually would be a great idea right now. But a sponge cake is the classic base for a lot of European desserts. So whether you're looking up an opera tort, um, now all the classic torts are escaping me because I'm under pressure. I put the pressure on myself. Um, Quite often, pastry chefs will make a simple syrup. So they will start with a plain neutral cake like this. This only has the hint of lemon in it and it's subtle. But to add flavor, you make a simple syrup, which is equal parts sugar and water, cooked up until the sugar dissolves. Then you can add a flavoring. You could add almond extract. You could add a liqueur. You could add anything along those lines, and it would flavor the cake and add moisture, which is another great trick to keep a sponge cake moist. This one is freshly baked, but if you know it's going to sit in the fridge for a while, you brush it with simple syrup, and that gives it that extra bit of moisture. So for this version, I'm making an enhanced whipped cream topping because I want something that's going to hold its shape a little longer. And so I'm using cream cheese and lemon juice to again bring out that lemon flavor, but also give me a set to the whipped cream so it doesn't collapse or weep or ooze, which whipped cream can do. And as I'm going through this, I'm going to give you another great whipped cream tip. So what I have is half a package of cream cheese that's been softened to room temperature. So that's 120 grams or 125 grams, just plain cream cheese. Now to that, I'm adding a third of a cup of sugar. And this is just softening out the cream cheese a little bit, liquefying it. So it's going to give this cream filling a bit of a cheesecake taste to it. Now, this is a place where I'm saying I don't want you to reduce the sugar in your sponge cake recipe. This is definitely a place you can cut down on the sugar a little bit if you wish to taste. But I like how the tang of the cream cheese with the sweetness and a little bit of added lemon really does work here. So I hope you can see everything clearly. You can see now how much softer that cream cheese is. Now to work in some flavor, a little more lemon zest. Oh, I can tell you've got the Zoom feature down pat. With each Oh Yum 101, we're getting better and better at this. And now, yes, I have some fresh lemon juice. This is 2 tablespoons. I think I'm going to switch to a whisk just to work this in. Now, the function of the lemon juice here is more than just a nice little tartness. I'm going to fold in whipped cream. And the acidity of the lemon juice, along with this cream cheese once it's chilled, the lemon juice will actually react with the fat in the whipping cream and tighten it up and almost without making creme fraiche, it will hold its set and shape so that you can assemble this cake. I wouldn't assemble it a day before, and it's more because of the strawberries, but the filling itself will set for a full day. So you can do this hours ahead of when you plan to serve it. So you can see how liquid that is right now. Now let me grab my whipped cream. I didn't think you needed to see me whip cream for 10 minutes or 6 minutes or by hand. This is 1.5 cups liquid, so 375 ml that I've whipped to a soft peak. Now here is a great whipped cream tip. It's hard to believe. I know in Australia and in South America, you're heading into your fall season now. We're heading into spring here in Canada. Strawberries are going to be plentiful before we know it. And so I love strawberries and cream together. And have you ever noticed when you whip cream, you add a little sugar, you put it in the fridge, you come back to it in an hour, and you put your spoon through it, and it just collapses? Well, it does break down, and I have the easiest fix for that. Instant skim milk powder. For every 1 cup or 250 ml of fluid whipping cream, you add 1 tablespoon, 15 ml of instant skim milk powder. You can add it at any point in the whipping process. And the protein in the skim milk powder binds with the fat in the whipping cream and it stabilizes it. So you can use that whipped cream to frost a cake, to dollop it on top of a dessert, and it will hold every swish and swirl for a full 24 hours. Even when you cut into the cake, it will stay in place. It's absolutely brilliant. So now I'm going to do this in 2 quick additions and just work that cream into the soft cream cheese mixture. And it will seem soft at first, but as that lemon juice comes into contact with the whipping cream, you'll find it actually starts tightening up a little bit. Did I add vanilla?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's add a splash of vanilla. There we go. See how smooth? It's fluffy, but it's got a little structure to it. So now we've got our cream, and it's time for the strawberries, which are relatively simple to prepare. I've just washed, hulled, and sliced strawberries. Depending where you are, seasonal ones may be available from the field. Around where I am, we have hothouse ones. These strawberries came from Will Van Vliet at his greenhouse. He also grows Gerbera daisies, so it was a treat to go down and pick those up with social distancing. Farm gate stand, honor system. So no one attends the stand. You just pick up your berries and leave your money in a box. Now, what I like to do to sweeten the berries, I find if I add straight sugar, well, you run into the issue where they get watery. They let out a lot of juice too quickly. And this time of year, I'm looking at my inventory of jams from last season, thinking I have to use them up. I hoard them over the winter, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, strawberry season's around the corner. I like adding a little strawberry jam, and this really is to taste. It adds a gorgeous shine to your berries, it sweetens them, and it even enhances the strawberry taste. So if you are buying berries out of season, well, it just takes it to a new level. Of course, you can do this with blueberries, raspberries, whatever you wish. See that nice little gloss that it's added? Great. Okay, so I don't want to block the view. I want you to be able to see the next step, which is slicing the cake. How's everyone doing here? Okay, I'm sorry you burnt your biscuits. That is traumatizing when you burn something. And it's that, you know what I'm the worst at? Toasting nuts. And especially, it always is the most expensive nuts. I'll burn pine nuts. I'll put them on a tray, and if it smells like popcorn, you know they went too far. So I'm with you on the trauma when you overcook things. Okay. Oh, good. Stefan asked a good question. Does the airiness of the batter deflate over time, or can I make multiple batches if I only have one small cake pan? I would say you need to get the batter in the oven within 15 minutes. So if I would make a suggestion, if you don't mind doing it in 2 batches, the recipe divides in half very easily. So then you can make, while one cake is baking, you can get the second batter going. So when you flip it out, it's quickly, but one cake pan, you need to let that cake cool in the pan. Okay, I'm talking through this with you, Stefan. You might need to just go cut the recipe in half and stick with the one cake and make a slightly smaller one. I hope that helps you out a little bit. All right, when it's time to cut a cake to fill it, if you cut it across just in one direction, chances are, I don't know how you are, but just like writing on an unlined page, I drop my lines and they aren't straight. So you might either favor going down or up by accident. So you want to use, when cutting a sponge cake, use a serrated knife. And what I do is, I don't cut all the way in, but just about a centimeter in. That way I can keep an eye that I've got my line right in the middle between the top and the bottom of this cake. And now I've cut with where I started, and I keep moving the cake around. And this is not hard to do. If you don't have a cake wheel that spins, even on a plate or a platter, you can just take your time and just 1 or 2 cuts, and you get a little closer to the center with each cut, and then you're going to feel a little release. This is also safer because your hand won't come in contact with the knife coming through the other side. And there we go. I can feel it let go. And there is that gorgeous sponge texture. It's got a nice moisture to it. You will get, with a sponge cake, you do get a fine crumb, but it's not a dry crumb. Oh, we need to see it again. It's got a nice, delicate texture here, nice moisture. All right, now the rest is really up to you. The flavor combinations, a lemon curd, as I said, would be nice in here. A generous amount of cream. You want to spread that from the center to the outside. I'm leaving the sides of this cake open, so I want to make sure you can see the cream nicely. A few gentle pushes. Okay, and now a good even layer of strawberries, rogue strawberry. Even on its own, if you wanted to do this simply, or you didn't want to assemble the cake ahead of time, you could simply dust the cake on its own with icing sugar, serve the cream and the fruit on the side, and you're all set. Doesn't that look appealing? I'm just artfully arranging a few so when I put the top layer on, you can see them peeking through. Oh, it smells good. I think it's the jam as much as the berries. Okay, and now the top layer gets simply put on top. And this you can choose to spread to the edge if you want. I'm going to go for the simple dollop and swish towards the center, not spread it all the way to the outside edge. Here, honey, do you want the spatula? Yeah? Can you taste the lemon?
It's so perfumey and delicious.
Good.
And it's not sweet. It's nice.
And then just a nice, generous sploosh of berries on the top. And if a couple go errant and fall off, it's just natural and real and delicious. Right before serving. Zooming will be tougher. A little dusting of icing sugar. Now, if you put icing sugar on the berries, it'll just melt away. So I just put it just to give a little polish to the outside edge of the cake. And there it is. A gorgeous sponge cake with that cream filling. But I think we worked in, I hope I gave you lots of tips to build your confidence in making a good, reliable sponge cake. I'd love, before I disappear, I love taking your questions. So I'm going to just take a peek at what you're writing and see if I can grab a few questions for you. I do follow up and we try and keep an eye on the questions you're writing. So this is not our only opportunity. And also, if you are tuning in late or you haven't seen an Oh Yum 101 yet, you can follow up and watch this later because we will post this as soon as we can, as soon as we yell cut. So let me take a peek here.
Someone's been asking if we could use this cake batter in cupcakes.
Oh, a good question. Can you use this cake batter in cupcakes? It will be okay. It is not my favorite recipe for cupcakes, and I'll be honest because you'll definitely have to use the paper liners, but the sponge cake batter may contract a little bit. So you may find you get a bit of a wow in your cupcakes. My concern would be when you try and peel away cupcake paper because it's different than parchment paper, that it may not come away cleanly. So I would lean towards, if you check out some of my other cupcake recipes, I do have some, including some that are sponge based. So you get that fluffiness and airiness. If you were to try it, if you can get parchment paper cupcake liners, those are different than just the paper liners. I think you would have better luck there. So I guess you've got a little online hunting to do as soon as we're done here. That was a very good question. Atena would love a lemon cake. Cake and frosting. Oh, here's a good question from Sarah Gar is asking, can I whip 18% cream to make whipping cream? I'm afraid not. You will not get, you need the fat content to get the volume in your whipped cream, and anything under 30% will not whip. Believe me, I would try with those little creamers to try and whip cream when I was a little kid. It won't work. It won't work. You do need the 30% or higher. That was a very, very good question.
Can you repeat the
Tip.
to stabilize?
Oh, yes. 808 Social Sardo is asking, can I repeat the whipping cream tip to stabilize whipped cream? Yes. So for every 250 ml, 1 cup of fluid whipping cream, you add 1 tablespoon of instant skim milk powder. Let me just go grab it because I have it. It's fine and granular. You do have to make sure you're using the instant because the regular needs time for it to dissolve, and you might get little granules in it. This dissolves very quickly. You add it at any point in the whipping process, beginning and fold it in afterwards. 1 tablespoon for every 250 ml, and that will hold your whipped cream stable. It's the easiest way to go. Oh, hello everyone. Oil versus butter in cakes. Aldo, good question. What's the difference? The difference is the cake recipe itself and the end result. You'll find that a lot of cakes that call for oil are heavier, more dense, rich cakes. A lot of chocolate cakes call for vegetable oil, where a lighter vanilla cake would call for butter. Vegetable cakes like carrot cake typically call for oil too, for that same moisture absorption and ease of mixing too. So if you really want a dense, moist cake, that's when you go, or you'll see that oil is called for. And I tend to go for a neutral vegetable oil. Olive oil, I have specific recipes for olive oil cakes that are delicious, but olive oil can lend a bitter taste and overwhelm the other flavors in your cake. So, very good question to ask. Sergio's asking if it jiggles, it's not ready yet. Oh, you've got your cake in the oven. Smelling great, but getting dark on top. Okay, Sergio, turn your oven down a little bit. There'll be, if you've still got a jiggle, like you when you touch the top of the cake and you know you can tell it's soft underneath, you're going to want to give it a little more time. If we were baking around the same time, listen, I've got 15 minutes left on my cake, so you're going to need to leave yours in the oven for about 15 minutes more. You're just about the point. Yes, you can check on the cake. If it's browning too much on top, can you move it to a lower rack in the oven? And you should be okay, just so you're giving it that time. It's a very, very good question. Oh, Sue's asking if I can add Q&As to my recipes in my books. Well, that's a good point. I do try and include a lot of extra tips, information, and when I write a recipe, I try and give you a lot of visual cues. You here are able to see what I'm doing, to witness. So even if I'm not saying something, you can see it happening. I'm definitely trying to put more step-by-step photos in my books, as well as articulating those textures when something, a batter is thick, or it should be thick, or thin, or pourable, spreadable. So that's a very good point. So I'll talk to my publisher and see if we can make room for more notes. These are great questions. Hello from Bulgaria. You know, I visited Bulgaria once. Went to Sofia. It was amazing, delicious. Shopska salad, gotta have it. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But I'm missing your question. Uh, oh, I missed the Bulgarian question. I'll stop talking about Sofia now. Okay, Justin, what's the difference between a Genoise sponge and a chiffon? They are very similar in appearance. You are correct. I find a chiffon cake sits between a Genoise and an angel food cake. So where an angel food cake is made only with whites, the Genoise is made with whole eggs. The chiffon is made by separating your eggs. And so you whip your egg whites with some sugar, you whip your yolks with some sugar, you work in your flour and flavors into that yolk base, fold them together. A chiffon cake is best baked in an angel food cake pan. So the same idea, don't grease the sides. It needs to climb up the sides of the cake. And like an angel food cake, out of the oven, you tip a chiffon cake upside down to let the eggs sort of, as they're hot, let them stretch. So when they cool, they hold their fullest volume. A chiffon cake in texture will be beautifully moist. It has a richness to it It is less sweet typically than an angel food cake, um, but a finer bubble structure than a Genoise sponge, which is kind of your standard sponge. So that was an excellent question to ask. Oh, we got a question about a substitution for evaporated milk. Well, I'd have to know where the recipe context is. Oh, and we've got tips about not burning caramel. We might have to do an Oh Yum 101 on caramel. TJ, I know, who you see pop up on the feed here, is the admin coordinator. He makes all of this magic happen. We'll have a discussion and see if caramel makes it to our Oh Yum 101 list. But in a nutshell, I'll give you some quick tips. What counts is you add, it's to give you more control. I put a thin layer of water in the bottom of my pan, then I add the sugar. That way, the sugar starts dissolving in the water before the heat hits it, so you won't get those hot spots. You want a little acidity. You can add cream of tartar, you can add lemon juice, or you can add sugar in its liquid state by adding a little bit of corn syrup to it that will help liquefy the sugar so it doesn't crystallize before it caramelizes. You do want to cook it on high heat. You don't want to stir it. You want to brush the sides of the pot as you're cooking it. But really, depending on your heat, whether you're using gas, electric, or induction, when you see the caramel start to turn an amber color, that's when you pull it off the heat because it will continue to cook. If you like the point of caramelization you have, if you have a bowl filled with ice water ready, you can drop the bottom of the pot in it and it'll help stop the cooking so it doesn't, because it will keep going. So I hope that gives you some good guiding tips. That's a good question to ask. Oh, and Julie's, we're jumping on the caramelized sugar wagon here. 101 about the stages of sugar from simple syrup to caramel, all the different, the thread stage, softball, hardball, and what they're used for. I think that's another great idea for Oh Yum 101. We're getting some good ideas. Hello from Tokyo. Yeah, Michael demonstrated on Instagram Live okonomiyaki yesterday. It's delicious. Oh, good. Here's a good question. What is the function of cream of tartar? Now, cream of tartar is acidity in a dry form. So it is great to add to egg whites when you're whipping them because the little bit of acidity helps stretch the protein in the egg white so it coaxes the best volume possible. That's essentially it. And as I mentioned, in the function of caramelizing sugar, the acidity helps the sugar not develop crystals, so you get a nice, smooth, shiny caramel. And I can see Michael's face. It is April 23rd, and it is now beautiful, Christmas-like snowing outside. We have had a crazy spring here in Southern Ontario, not far from Toronto. My goodness. And here we are making a lovely springtime sponge cake. I think I'll just take two more questions because we're approaching our 1 hour. This has been so much fun. Your questions are amazing. And I love bake versus no bake cheesecake. You know, I have been baking for decades, and it is only until this last year I actually got around to making a no bake cheesecake, and it's now my new favorite. So that's a good debate for us to have. Maybe I have to do both as an Oh Yum 101.
Cheesecake Wars.
Cheesecake Wars. Oh, pastry cream, another good idea. I'm loving these ideas. Oh, I've got a lot of Oh Yum 101s to do here.
Barcelona.
Oh, hello from Barcelona.
Ambassador.
Okay, tips on beginners cooking a cake. Well, I hope you saw, and if you review this video again, that you don't need complicated tools or equipment. If you have hand beaters, you can make a delicious sponge cake. An oven thermometer is probably your best friend as you're new to baking and you have to become friends with your oven. That's a big tip for new bakers, and start to know where the hot spots are in your oven, top right, bottom left. And if you need to, some ovens, you need to rotate your pans because it's hotter at the back compared to the front. But you don't need complicated tools or ingredients. If you have a whisk, a spatula, a couple of basic cake pans, there is a lot you can do. And like anything that we try, practice makes perfect. So the first time you do a recipe is usually it's rehearsal or practice session. Sometimes it comes out great, but baking, like anything, with repetition comes the learning and the advancement. And that's why I know as bakers, you absolutely love baking and it's a bit addictive. And it's that sense of sharing and giving, but yet self-fulfillment at the same time that makes experiences like this so wonderful. So, you know what? I think that's just a perfect place to wrap things up. I hope you're all staying well, staying home. You can keep calm and bake on. And I'll see you next week for another Oh Yum 101. I'll make sure I put the vote out there. If you're making this sponge cake right now or even over the weekend, please post photos to any of my social tags listed below on this video. Hashtag OYum101 because I'm following it and I will see your pictures. Have a great weekend, everyone. I think I need to cut into this cake. Oh, we're actually going to see me slice this cake.
Erica from Seattle says hi.
Hey, hello, Erica. Oh, I thought I was going to say hi to Magnus. I'm not sure if Magnus is watching. Got lots of hellos. The cream, the berry.
Okay,
All right.
let's say goodbye.
Well, enjoy, everyone. Take care.